Hello, hello, fearless listeners. Are you ready for another episode of Let Fear Bounce? It's the podcast that's all about conquering challenges and facing our fears. I'm your host, Kim Langling, and each week we'll dive into inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical tips to help you turn your fear into your greatest ally. So sit back, relax, grab that cup of coffee, and let's discover how to make fear our bouncing board towards a life filled with endless possibilities right here on Let Fear Bounce. Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. And I am so glad that you are here and spending just a small part of your day today with myself, your host, Kim Langling, and my special guest today, David Shamszad. He is also a real estate CEO, industry leader, and fearless mental health advocate. But that is not his entire story, folks. He also has bipolar disorder and is a recovering alcoholic. And that, my friends, is where his story begins. And that, all you fearless listeners, is what we're going to chat about today. So welcome, David. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for being my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me on. That was a really wonderful introduction, and I've been looking forward to the interview as well.
You know, you have quite a background, and we were talking off mic before the show, your story of how you turn it around and how you become an industry leader in real estate. And that's a multi-million-dollar revenue per year business that you've got going. So you're building yourself quite a legacy, which I think is awesome. And just how you turned it around from, or if you did, I don't want to assume. I don't want to assume anything. So let's start with you. You have bipolar disorder. You're a mental health advocate, I'm assuming, because of that and your journey, and also a recovering alcoholic. When did that part of your journey begin?
Great question. Let's see. So for the most part, about 75% of mental illnesses set in the early 20s. That's pretty typical of depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and a lot of mental illnesses and disorders kind of show up and manifest around that time. And that was pretty true of me too. When I was in when I was in college and my early 20s, something was wrong for sure. And I started to notice, okay, I'm not having like a bad day. Feels more catastrophic than that. And I had a feeling that when I'm experiencing a bad mood, I just started to feel this is different. This is different than what a bad mood used to be, or what I think other people are feeling. And when I was in a good mood, I was on the moon. And I started to recognize people kind of reacting to me a little bit whoa, settle down. And at first it was a day or two, and I'd have a day where getting out of bed seemed really, really difficult. And I think it's really hard for people to understand that. And I think that's why there's a lot of stigma around mental health, is because it's very invisible. And when people say things like, I can't get out of bed today, it's easy to kind of be you can roll your eyes and kind of be get over it. But to the person experiencing it, I can tell you firsthand, I'm not a weak person. It's not a matter of getting over it. It is the gravity pulling you back into bed is overwhelming. And just to give an example,
I like how you describe that, the gravity pulling you back into bed. That's actually such a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, almost feels physically like you are being pulled.
Yes, there's a big weight on you.
Totally.
Not letting you back out.
Yeah, exactly.
So I resonate with that. I live with PTSD, and along with that comes anxiety and depression. And I've been quite vocal and honest about that since I decided to do this podcast of Let Fear Bounce. So when I have folks on, and that sentence that you said, I'm like, oh my goodness, what a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah.
And you also said you used the word invisible. And I often say, you never know the battles that people are fighting because they're silent battles.
That's right.
So never think that someone that's dealing with a mental health issue is weak in any way, because they battle each and every day. And that takes the heart of a warrior to get through it.
Hmm. But people can't see it. And that's why it's easy to kind of make conclusions, and think to yourself, oh, this person just needs to kind of, they're being melodramatic or they're being whatever. And it's really not like that. But at the time, okay, so back in my 20s, and these episodes are starting to become more and more intense. The pressure I felt to get over it, to not tell anybody, to work through it, becomes intense, because all of a sudden you are feeling that like sense of being different. And it reminded me of back when I was in grammar school and was wearing a hearing aid. So I'm half deaf. And it reminded me of that feeling of being different. And my mom would let me out of her minivan. And as soon as she drove down the hill, I took my hearing aid off and I put it in my pocket and didn't let anybody see it. And that was the same thing. The thing that I started to learn to do to cope was drink. And if I felt depressed, drinking helped me engage. Like having a conversation with a person when you're feeling your mind racing, you feel like you're talking on on stage to a crowd. Like it's that difficult just to have a one-on-one conversation. And so I drank. It made everything easier. It made navigating life just feel better. And when I was feeling, I didn't know it was manic at the time, but when I was feeling uplifted, drinking was great then too. It made it feel more fun and accessible. So I just got into a habit of self-medicating. I didn't know what I was self-medicating. I felt a relationship to alcohol where like this isn't just like a thing. This is part of my body. Like it is. It's essential. And so that was my routine. And then like it got worse and worse. And instead of 2 days, it would be a week. Instead of a week, it started to get closer to 10 days, 2 weeks. And it got to a point where when I was depressed, I could not function. I thought about suicide all the time. It was on my mind. I just had irrational thoughts that I obsessed over. And when I was manic, I was hyperactive, didn't eat, didn't sleep. I was very effective at work for that reason. I worked with at-risk kids and it was a 24-hour job. And like someone needed to be up with them all night. I was great at it. I wasn't healthy, but I had the energy to
Right.
run around. So the inflection point was, this went on and on and on for a couple of years. The inflection point was I had been up for 2 weeks riding real high. I had a day off of work and I had this idea that I could go, I was like in okay shape. Like I was active, but I wasn't a marathon Ironman, whatever. I had this idea that I could go do a 50-mile bike ride, which I never did, but I just had a bike and I was like, okay, I can ride 50 miles. And then after that, I'm going to run a half marathon. I'm going to do 13 miles. So I spent all day. I was out the door in the morning. I probably didn't eat, had a cup of coffee, and I just decided that was going to be my challenge for the day. And I did it like bounding along. I felt like I could never run out of energy. And when I got home, all of a sudden I thought, oh, okay, I can go to sleep tonight. I feel like I finally sort of run out of gas. This is nice. And then I woke up, and it was within 30 seconds, I knew that it was the worst day of my life. 8 hours later, the entire script flipped. And it's hard to describe how someone could feel so different just from going to bed and waking up. But it's a disorder and it's invisible and it is hard to explain. But I knew with all the certainty in the world within a few minutes of being awake that I would be better off dead than feeling the rest of my life that way. And I can still remember the feeling. It was the worst day of my life. And the only thought I had was that like the pain would leave. it could leave in a stream of blood if I cut my wrist. I obsessed over this idea, and I eventually found myself in the woods. We were kind of in a rural setting. I was in the woods, and we always had a knife on us because there was this outdoor centric facility. And so I took out my knife and I held it against my wrist, and I watched it stretch and contort the skin. And the last thought I remember having was that skin was like a little more resilient than I thought it would be. It's more leathery than it is fragile. And I had that thought, and then this counselor at work, he's a psychologist that worked with kids, but he had been following me around because my boss had seen me, probably thought I was losing my mind. And he tackled me from behind, and next thing I know, I woke up in a psychiatric hospital. And spent a couple of weeks there, and that's where they diagnosed me. They're like, what you've been experiencing is bipolar disorder.
That moment, because it struck me, as you said, one of the last thoughts that you remember thinking is, oh, my skin's more leathery than I thought.
Yeah.
Weird. You know, more stretchy or whatever. And it's interesting how the brain works and how that's the thought you had. I think for me, this is just my thought, that moment that you thought was just enough time for the guy that was following you to come in and tackle you.
Totally. I know,
you know, there was that sequence of events.
Yeah.
How it played out.
No, I know that's true. And like that guy, his name's Mike, and he's amazing. And I did continue to stay in touch with him. No, he saved my life. And the next 2 weeks I spent learning and participating in understanding bipolar disorder. And but I was young still. I didn't want to go out and talk about it. I didn't want to tell anyone. And this is where, you know, is another thought that I had. And this is the first thought I remember having when I woke up in the hospital was, here I was, like, this guy had saved my life. It was probably the worst day of my life, and I was maybe lucky to be alive. And the first thought I had was, oh my God, what if people find out? What will everybody think if I'm here? How do I keep this a secret? Looking back now, I'm like, yeah, no shit. No wonder there's a problem with people understanding this, and no wonder there's stigma around mental illness. That was my priority in the moment, was keeping it a secret. And so I got out of the hospital, and I had an operating manual. I had pills I had to take, and I had certain things to do and not do, but I didn't embrace the diagnosis in any real way. I kind of thought I could put it in the rearview mirror, pop my pills, and like be good to go. Like it was chicken pox, and just I had it once and it would go away. But no, I continued to not treat this illness the way I should have. Not enough. I did take medicine most of the time, but I still just relied on alcohol and substance abuse to do the rest of the job of treatment. And that went on for about a decade. You know, I changed scenery. I moved to the West Coast. I did have a girlfriend. You mentioned when we were talking about sticking with people with mental illness and how difficult that is for a partner or a family member. I had a girlfriend who, and I'll get to this, is my wife today. And she watched this all up close, and she stuck with me. And unfortunately, like, she had to watch the next almost decade too. I started drinking more. I started drinking more heavily. I wasn't drinking 10 drinks and kind of drifting off to sleep. I wanted dozens of drinks. I wanted enough to be completely unconscious. The act of drinking to me wasn't anything less than getting myself unconscious. That was what going out for a drink.
That was your end goal.
Yeah. And I would go to a bar and bring a flask with me so that I could drink more than everybody else. You know, like, okay, let's have a drink. Well, it's been 5 minutes. No one else is getting that second drink. Let me go to the bathroom real quick and have a pull of my flask. And then I'm able to. And so I did this dance for years of trying to function, convincing myself I knew something was wrong, but like convincing myself I could pull this off. Like, because when you're drinking that much or using that much, like, you lie to yourself and you convince yourselves of we convince ourselves of absolute bullshit. And I really believed that I was pulling off this magic act. And but I was getting arrested. I was getting in fights. I was going to jail. I was putting my life in serious jeopardy, not to mention people around me. And I'll just kind of wrap up this phase, but like the last night I ever drank alcohol was about 11 years ago, almost 12. And I was out at this point, like it was really hard for people to hang out with me. Like most people just avoided me. I drank a lot by myself. But I found some people to meet up with one night. And at that point I was blacking out. So when you drink that much, you start blacking out really easily. Your mind just disappears after a few drinks. But for me, I always thought of blacking out. Like you always remember one thing. You remember like, oh yeah, I had pizza over there. And then you start piecing your night together. You remember like a sight or a sound, and you have like a little inventory of memory. This was a night where I could not remember I had the faintest clue. There was just pages torn out of the book. There was nothing. And I woke up and in my apartment, and I had like blood all over me, and I had cuts and bruises, and I'm trying to figure out why. And I'm like, well, I must have gotten into another fight. And I'm like trying to figure out how I got home, and I have my car keys, and there's blood on these keys that's all dried. And I'm like drive my car home? Like I couldn't possibly have. So I start wandering around the neighborhood praying that I don't see my car. So I'm like going block by block, looking for my car, hoping to God I don't see it. Because there's no phone app back then for where your car is. There wasn't any of that. Yeah. So I had to go find it. And sure enough, like 3 blocks later, I see the silver bumper of my car. And like, I'm terrified, and I'm so devastated that I would do this. And I've driven drunk a million times, to be honest, but that one was different. Like I really had no clue. And just the thought of being out driving around the city, not even being able to remember it, it's intense. So I get to my car, and there's blood on the door, and there's blood inside, and I'm petrified. I have no idea. I'm like, I hope it's mine, but I'm scared that there was a hit and run. So I go back home, and I'm online looking at the SFPD website to see if there was some reported hit and run. I really have no clue. And I knew in that moment that it wasn't just about me anymore, that I was putting other people's lives in danger. I was putting my partner's well-being in danger, having her not know if she was going to get a call from the hospital or jail. I was putting anybody out in the streets. I'm driving around or behaving that way, being violent, and like, who am I to destroy someone else's world? This wasn't about me anymore. And it unfortunately took that long for me to put it together. But that understanding that like I was truly a danger to people around me, that crystallized it for me. I'm like, this needs to stop. So my girlfriend and me, we like found a chemical dependency recovery program. I got checked in. This counselor I met there got me started. She told me straight up, I will never forget this. She's like, you're not going to survive this. If you don't stop drinking, you are not going to survive. It might be one night like that, or you might just like wither away if you're lucky, but you are not going to survive what you're doing right now. You need to give yourself 30 days. Just give yourself 30 days, and then we'll go from there. And I did. And that was almost 12 years ago. Let me be clear. It wasn't like, oh yeah, 12 years later. It took a lot of physically, mentally, emotional, painstaking work to get through that.
Well, then just that alone, but you had other underlying things going on with you as well. Yeah. I mean, the bipolar.
Yeah.
That did not make any of your journey easier.
No. And that's the thing. You can't treat mental illness when there's something called dual diagnosis, and it's really prevalent with people with mental illnesses. They're also abuse substances and have a substance abuse disorder. And like, you listen to my just 10 minutes, it's pretty clear why, because there's this immense pain and despair that people are feeling. And yeah, alcohol or drugs, opioids make it feel better. And so people get addicted. All of a sudden you can't treat mental illness when you also have a substance abuse disorder. It's like you're moving the target every day. You don't know how you're feeling and if it's a am I in an episode, or have I just been drinking for a week? And everything becomes muddled together. And taking the alcohol out of the equation, it was like, oh my God, like, okay, now I can get back to trying to deal with the fact that I've had a bipolar diagnosis for a decade.
Yeah.
And, I haven't done the work. I don't see a therapist. I skip my psychiatry appointments. All I do is get my prescription refilled. It's about it. And so, but all of a sudden, I removed alcohol from the equation, and I started to say, okay, I'm not going to have a full, healthy life if I'm not treating this. And I started to embrace. I didn't tell people. I still really had not told anyone about bipolar, but I at least started to admit it to myself. And so, after a year, all of a sudden, what I realized was like just that year of not drinking and some amount of self-care, not nearly as much as I do now, but some amount of self-care, going to my psychiatry appointments, for example, all of a sudden, like the handcuffs started coming off my life. And I'm like, oh my God, like I have intelligence, I have creativity, I have problem solving ability. I can be a good partner. And I wasn't even trying that hard, and all of a sudden things started happening, because we have so much potential, but if we're stifling it by not treating a mental illness or by abusing a substance, we're tamping down our ability to think, to work, to love, to do all these things that we're capable of. And that's what got me go. That's why I'm here 12 years later, is because I got excited about the feeling of success, and I started to get almost addicted to like how wonderful my life was starting to look. My friends talked to me again, and they supported me. Like my relationship with my girlfriend, I mean, she was pretty much out the door. She told me around that last year or so, I can't watch this up close anymore. Like I can't do this. And all of a sudden it was like we met again for the first time, because she was then dealing with the person she had met 10 years ago. And all of a sudden I'm kicking ass at work. Like I was barely hanging on to work. Fortunately, I was an independent contractor, so it was kind of hard to fire. You just you stop making money at a certain point in real estate. But all of a sudden I'm working and I'm getting deals done and I'm having success. And that propelled me forward. It was like ripping those handcuffs off. So I'll break there because I've been going for a bit, but that was the inflection point, and kind of riding that wave of success. Here I am now.
I like how you said, kind of like your eyes were opened.
Yeah.
And it was not, I'm not going to saying it happened quickly. That's not true. But the way that you described it, it was like, for you in that moment, it was like, oh, look at all the colors out here.
Yeah.
Look at everything I can see. Wow, I can do something. I think that moment, I love hearing that. Like you describe it as handcuffs breaking away. The chains were breaking away. And I always describe that type of feeling as, I have a brick wall, and the brick wall started to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
All those cracks and crevices, and you could start to see light was shooting through.
Yep.
And you could start to see, and then all of a sudden you just like big deep breath in with the good and out with the bad.
Yep, that's right.
How awesome. And I'm really glad that you had that moment because you're still here. Obviously the world needs you. Obviously you have a purpose. I tell people all the time, the world's a better place because you're in it. Your past, your history, bumpy road,
Yeah.
but you made it through it. Battered, maybe a little bit weary.
Yeah, a little battered,
but definitely stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely stronger, and for the better. So now, because if you didn't go through all that, you wouldn't be able to help people the way you do now. Being a mental health advocate, you wouldn't be able to talk about any of that unless you had that personal experience, because that's what people resonate with. That's what people's hearts are going to gravitate towards. So go you. I mean, it's just awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Go us. And that's kind of my, that's my goal now, is to, I have got, I've got the business, and we have been fortunately able to be really successful. And that took, yeah, I mean, that took 10 years of incremental work, and we're in a good spot. And as I continue to have an amazing team, and as we continue to grow the business and move forward, like they've helped me create a situation where I have time now to start thinking more about how I can help people who were in some version of where I was, in my
Right.
early 20s and throughout
Now,
my
I
20s.
want to interject real quick because with your business, you're the founder and CEO of a real estate business, but you do a lot more than just real estate in that, correct?
So yeah, we do. The company does quite a bit. We invest in properties. We manage a bunch of buildings, apartment and office buildings. We do like lease brokerage transactions, so commercial leases, residential, building sales. We have our own like repair and maintenance crew where our team is going out and taking care of these buildings that we manage. So it's a pretty, to use like the terminology, a little vertically integrated firm where we're doing a lot of stuff in
Yeah.
the investment real
And you
estate.
have 50 or more employees.
Yeah, we have about a team of about 50 right now.
So,
And it all
I
started
mean,
with
for everybody listening, this is a massive success story because
thank you.
everything
Yeah.
you've just heard, the story
Well,
you just
we're not
shared.
done yet.
No, the story's not done. Heck no.
Yeah,
But what you just shared was so bumpy, and there might be a few people out there that are sitting in that spot that you were in.
yeah, yeah. And what I do say to them is like, there's really just a limitless amount of potential and things that we can do. And it really is a day by day process. It's
Yes.
really scary. Fortunately, like I was young, and I think that's a part of it. I had that. I just still had the energy to try to go do some of these things, but it was terrifying. Like I have a court record. I have a record. I was in jail not that long ago. I was doing all these things within the past couple of years. Who am I to like try to start a business? But I was just pretty determined that like I was going to have this new life, and so once I had started doing well enough at work, I was like, let me try to do this on my own. I loved the company I was at. Like they were really supportive of me, but I needed to change the scenery because like this is the same office I'd been going in every day, like bleary eyed and hungover, with a black eye behind my glasses. Like it, I just needed a change of scenery. And so I was like, I had a few bucks that I just earned on a pretty like large sale transaction, and I took that and I rented a little sublet office and decided to give it a go. And I had like one client, so then I had two clients, and pretty soon I got like one employee to start helping, and then we had four, and just it was literally like day by day, and it can start in that like basic way, like people that have a big company or like profound success in the arts, like it all started with that like a few bucks and a sublease somewhere. Like that's how all this shit starts, is like
Right.
a basement. And there's different stories like
An extra bedroom in your house.
yeah, totally. And there's obviously some like incredible stories of just raw genius, and people never go through that, but like for the most part most businesses are just built off of that. And you can do that in the way that it becomes easy is when you just start thinking about it one day at a time. And like if the obstacle is starting a business, it's like, okay, cool, let me not think about what I want this to look like in 10 years, because that's kind of overwhelming. It's just like, what are the things that I can do today to chip away at this thing? And like then I'll go to bed, and then the next day I'll do a few more things, and it's make it bite size.
I was just going to say bite size increments.
Totally. And that's the same thing with that. That's the same way I think about self-care and recovery. It's not like, okay, you know what, I'm going to be sober for 12 years. Like that's a daunting task, and like not something that someone should think about. That's why that counselor told me to not drink for 30 days. She thought I should not drink for the rest of my life, probably, but she didn't tell me that. She was just like, don't drink for 30 days. Because if I had thought about, I'm never drinking again, I just wouldn't have done it. But 30 days, and even that's a lot, but you can think, okay, what do I need to do today
Right.
to get to tomorrow? And I'm going to do these things to distract myself. I'm going to like, I used to go to the gym at night like night, like 10 to midnight is when I would go play basketball, go lift weights, because that's usually when I was drinking. And so it was like, okay, I'm going to structure my day this way to help me get through it. And you just start doing little things to chip away at this goal. And like, yeah, 10 years can go by without a drink. 10 years can go by where I don't say successfully, but I've done a pretty good job managing the symptoms of bipolar disorder. And that's just from like, okay, what do I got to do today? What are the behavioral tools that I've learned over time to try to implement today? What are the routines that I need in place? I'm a routine freak, and my wife always gives me a hard time for how I am about my routines. But the reality is, like, that's like the rope that I'm holding on to like help keep myself in check. And I just chip away at it every day using them.
You have these great visuals that you give me. It's the rope that you're holding on to.
Yeah, I just saw like a rope. Yeah, when I was talking.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, because I living with PTSD, I have to refocus.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you started going to the gym from 10 to midnight because that's normally when you wouldn't be drinking.
Yeah.
So you had to refocus and fill that time with something else that's more healthy, and bit by bit. And I have found I have to be outside a lot. That's where I breathe. That's how I always say it. I have to be outside so I can breathe, because sometimes walls are too much.
Yeah.
So I walk miles a day with my dog.
Oh, wow.
And I love it. I live in the country. I'm able to do that. I have, when I walk out my back door and I'm on my deck, I have woods and fields. So that open space, I need open space. So I understood that that's the rope that you hold on to. But what a great visual. That would be a cool picture for the cover of a book.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm seeing it now.
It's the rope. It's the rope. Are you seeing it?
Yeah,
Are you seeing it? There you
go.
There's my little
nugget
said that for you.
Before. That's not like a line that I've got. That's just popped into my head as we were talking. But
no, and I love when that happens, because there's little things that you're tossing. There's little nuggets you're tossing out. I'm catching them.
Good.
So this is fun. Now, speaking of book cover, segue.
Yeah.
See how smoothly I did that.
Well done. Nicely done.
You have written a book that is due to be released next year. So tell us about that, because as an author myself, that's very exciting stuff.
It is. So, like, literally this started kind of like I was saying, like about 5 or 6 years ago. I did not think I want to write a book and have people read it. It literally started because I started journaling, and it was entirely a therapeutic exercise as I was trying to take care of myself. I just started to write more, and I started to write stories. Sometimes they were about different nights I had and just reliving them for the purpose of vulnerability and like coming to terms with it. Because I had really, for the first few years, I had really thought that like I could put my past in the rear view mirror and just sort of bury it, put like a pillow over its face and just like smush it out of existence. And I started to realize, okay, like I'm doing a lot better, and I've got this company, and me and my wife are married now, but like there's still a lot of trauma that I have not recovered from. And so I started to try to be more vulnerable to it, just to myself. And I'm writing. And then I start to realize I've got like a bunch of short stories. And then I had this idea of like, well, maybe I could just kind of make this into like a tapestry of, something cohesive. And eventually that morphed into like, well, I've kind of started writing a book. Let me give it like, a story arc and stitch it together. And I still hadn't ever thought about like anyone else reading it. It was very much a diary, honestly. I just thought of it as a creative project, and a healing tool. And then all of a sudden, just from talking to people, because I started to take like a few weeks at a time and like disappear and just go write. I'd go somewhere random and get an Airbnb and write every day. And that was in addition to writing on the weekends. And then like people just eventually were like, yo, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, make this a thing, like, why are you just going to write and then not share it with anybody?
Yeah.
It's because and the reason is because I was still pretty secretive about things. And then I got to a point of like this book, and like not even the book, but just like everything that I have been through and have to say in any way that maybe is articulated well enough for someone else to resonate with is something that could help. And I was like, it's time for me to get like super vulnerable about this, so that because if I can get really raw here, and somebody who's maybe in their 20s or whatever can relate to it because of how opened up I am, and that maybe doesn't change their life, but maybe just nudges them a little bit in a slightly different direction, that eventually along the way can just help be a part of their rebound.
Right.
I was like, I just got to do that, and that's what crystallized the idea. Like, okay, like I'm gonna write this book, and I'm gonna work hard to like get it out there. And as hard as it is to have these conversations, like with you, and tell this story to people that I don't even know yet, and it's really freaking hard. Like, it's much easier to just keep this stuff a secret and live my life and go to work. But I knew, like, okay, if I can get this out there, and if even if it helps just one person a little bit, like if it potentially saved one person's life from being, worst case to best case, cool, it's worth it. So that's the origin of the book. And
So what is the title of the book?
the book will be called Coming Up for Air. And the reason it's called that is I always felt like, you were talking about visuals earlier, like the way I could describe my life in that really difficult decade was drowning. I always felt like I was drowning. And the way I think about addiction, I think of it as drowning. The way I think about an untreated illness is like drowning, and just being held underwater. And
being held under.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yes, that's another interesting visual, because it's not that you were just drowning because you couldn't swim. It's you were drowning because you were being held under.
Yeah. Like I imagine being pulled from the depths and fighting to get to the surface, and not being able to yet. And so that, to go back to the metaphor, visuals and whatnot, like, yeah, that just always resonated with me. So I always thought of like that point about a decade ago as like the moment I came up for air, and then like breathed air once again, and realized like
You're able to shove the monster aside for that second, long enough to get up and get a big breath.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like the theme of the book. And there's, it relates back to the concept of drowning and what that feels like. And I think,
and what a scary thing. That's a scary visual.
It is a scary thing. Totally.
And a lot of people are living that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a way to, not to lean too hard into the cliche here, but like, there's a way to come up for air. There's a pathway to it. And like, I mean, I could tell anybody out there, like, because I know that right now there are millions of people that feel like they are drowning, and they don't actually believe that there is a pathway out of it.
Yeah.
And I also felt that. And that's the crazy thing. It's not like, okay, I got to get things together soon. You don't really believe that that's possible. And I didn't either. I had fully resigned to the idea that like the partner that was never going to leave me, the one thing I would have left in my life, was alcohol. I thought that like I could ride off into the sunset with it, and it was the only partner that understood me. And if my friends leave and my girlfriend leaves and work disappears, it's okay, because I'll be on this island alone, and I'll be okay because I have alcohol with me. That's where I was at. I did not see like this new life that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that people out there also don't see it yet, but like there is a rebound possible. And for them, for you, whoever's listening. I was talking literally yesterday with someone about like, I feel that I am the luckiest person alive. Like there were so many nights, days, periods of time where like I very easily could have died. I could have put myself in an, if not dead, a situation that I couldn't recover from. And I didn't. And people get killed doing much less, you know. People just have a stroke of bad luck, and I had immensely good cat with 9 lives type of dumb luck. But it would have run out. It always runs out. Like that luck vacates the scene sooner or later. And it's like, don't forget that. And if there's a way to rebound before it does, you know, do it. Because we're lucky if we're still here after some of the ways I mistreated myself physically and mentally. I'm extremely lucky to have been given enough opportunities to sort it out. So
well, there's a reason for it, you know, and you're experiencing, I
like
think,
so. Yeah, I appreciate
what you're going through now and what you're doing now for the good of people.
Yeah, and that's why, like, so a few years ago, that's why I got to the point of like, you know what, I'm not just gonna keep kind of letting this be like my background, but I'm gonna kind of embrace it. I'm not just gonna go to my day job every day and like kind of pretend that none of this ever happened, because I want it to not happen to other people, right? And so I'm like, let me just like let me use myself as an example of like, you know, what can happen, like what a good outcome can be, through making some really tough decisions and being extremely vulnerable. Like this shit doesn't happen if you don't really fess up to yourself about what condition you have.
Right. Yeah, you have to. It's like a big old Band-Aid. I mean, you got to leave it out there all raw.
Super raw.
Yeah, and it is hard. It's super hard, and it's not just something you do once. It's a daily thing that you're still dealing with.
Yeah.
You know, that's not something you just say, "Oh, okay, I overcame that." The people that don't understand, it's because they're not educated. They have not educated themselves on mental illness or mental health. I think a lot of times because it's scary and it makes people uncomfortable. They don't want to talk about it. It's very uncomfortable, makes them cringe, makes their shoulders hunch up. I'm like, oh, no, that sounds too uncomfortable. I don't want to hear it. Something might happen to them or a loved one. And then they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do?
Oh, it touches everybody.
Yes, it does. It touches everyone. So I think what you're doing and sharing and being vulnerable and being raw, and with your book coming up for air, which you said it's coming out next year, going to be released next year. What an awesome thing. You definitely have to keep in touch with me and let me know when that comes out, because I'll help spread the word. Awesome stuff. You got to carry your scars with you, whether they're invisible or not. And I don't think people realize just how difficult it is to fight those little mini battles each day, or people don't realize just how many wins a person has in the day. Because sometimes a win is just getting out of bed. You know, on those tough days you said where it felt like there was a weight on you and it was like you really couldn't get out of bed. It was too heavy to get out of bed some days. For some people sitting out there listening right now, if you get out of bed and hey, if you even brush your teeth, holy cow, 2 wins right there. You're on a roll. Keep it up. Good job. You know?
And I want to help create a world, and I want to live in a world where we see mental illness as any other condition. And when you see somebody with a broken leg, there's no judgment. There's just an understanding that, okay, you have a broken leg, so you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Like you're not running for a while. You're going to do physical therapy. You're going to take these steps to fix it, and then you're going to get better. And I want to live in a world where we see like our brain is just another part of our body. And I imagine a world where like we see a mental illness in the same way we see a lot of physical conditions, without judgment, without stigma, with just an understanding that you go get help and you don't need to keep it a secret because there's no judgment. There's just pathways to get better, because living with moderate or severe, like living with a mental illness that you're not treating, it's putting such a limit on the happiness and potential that you can feel. And that sucks. That's terrible. And it's like, no, you wouldn't do that for any other disorder or disease. You wouldn't just like pretend it doesn't exist. You would just do that. You would take advantage of what we know as a society in the 21st century and how to treat certain things. And the people around you would help you do it. And that's sort of how I feel at this point in my life. I didn't always, but at this point in my life, I feel like the stigma around mental illness is what gets in the way of treatment. And the person who can't break through that stigma and get the help that they should, what their life looks like is not nearly the picture that it could.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And I like how you said, don't limit your happiness.
Yeah.
I mean, how perfect, it's such a simple statement, but so true. Don't limit your happiness, folks. Yeah. I love that. You've tossed out so many cool little nuggets today.
Giving you the nuggets. You wanted the nuggets.
Yes. And so David, you've been tossing out so many awesome little nuggets today. And as I had said off mic prior to the show, when we get ready to wrap up, as we get ready to wrap up, since you've tossed out a whole bunch, but I'm still going to ask you to toss another one. If you could toss out a nugget of hope, I ask all of my guests to toss out a nugget of hope for our listeners that they can tuck away and carry with them throughout the day or through the rest of the week, whatever the case may be.
Okay. I've got a nugget of hope. And this is something that I think about. I'm going to try to articulate it. But it's a feeling I have, and I feel it every single day. We don't have the choice to snap our fingers and wake up one morning and have our obstacles disappear, but we do have the choice to embrace courage every day. We can choose courage every day in our approach to dealing with them. I can't wake up and have my life look different, but I can figure out what I can do courageous today about it. So that's my nugget of hope is choose courage every day.
Good stuff. Good stuff there, David.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on the show, and you're a wonderful host and brought out a great conversation, I think.
Well, thank you. Thank you. No, it was an absolute joy and pleasure to have you on. You enlightened me on quite a few things. And I hope that the folks out there, all you all listening, I hope that, I know there were so many good little things that were tossed out. I hope you tuck those away, think about them, reach out, get guidance or help if you need it. And as David said, don't limit your happiness. Mm-hmm. Don't limit your happiness, folks, because there's a whole lot more to life than the darkness that you might be sitting in. There's a whole lot of light out there. Don't limit your happiness and embrace courage every day. How awesome. David, thank you so much, very much for being my guest on Let Fear Bounce today. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And everybody out there listening, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. So tune in each Wednesday to Let Fear Bounce. This is Kim Langling, your host. Everybody be well, stay well, and be blessed. And that is a wrap, my fearless friends. Thanks for bouncing along with me on another episode of Let Fear Bounce. I hope you're feeling a bit motivated and ready to take on any challenge that might come your way in the coming days. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode of Let Fear Bounce. Tune in each week for your dose of inspiration from my amazing guests from all over the world. So until next time, keep bouncing forward and stay fearless, my friends. Everybody be well, stay well, and above all, be blessed.